Ryan didn't show up. He got advance word Trump was going to do that in Wisconsin, in Green Bay. That's his state. Ryan didn't show up. The Republican governor, Scott Walker, didn't show up. The Republican senator in trouble, Ron Johnson, didn't show up. Last night, Trump was in New Hampshire. He did not repeat the Kelly Ayotte endorsement in her home state. So he was only willing to eat his peas once, I guess. What's happening, maybe it doesn't matter. Trump has proven conventional wisdom wrong so many times. But his own party, I think this was abandoned ship or abandoned Trump week.
And I think the real question is, is this what Donald Trump are we going to see later this week? What Donald Trump are we going to see next week, next month? I mean, he has a way of sort of having these terrible moments where everybody seems to be sort of coalescing against him, if you will, and then, which he definitely had this last week, and you see this about face. But I don't think that we can conclude one way or another, where he's going to be headed next.
But there is an acknowledgement, a tacit acknowledgement that things aren't going wrong. Trump does not like to admit whenever he does something wrong, but just by virtue of these endorsements, walking back that comment about the Iran videotape, even praising the crying baby that he kicked out of his rally, he's realizing that things aren't going well. He reads the polls, as we know, as well as anybody else, and he needs to do something. And people are coming to him saying, look, when people are talking openly, or at least privately, about will Donald Trump drop out, should we look for another candidate, that's not good heading into Election Day. So clearly there's an effort to rejigger his campaign, and that's why he's having this big economic speech on Monday in Michigan, try to reset the narrative a little bit.
But clearly the biggest issue for him this week was his criticism of the Khan family.
Right.
That family whose son was killed in Iraq in 2004, Muslim American. That really set a lot of Republicans in motion to say this is too far. You saw polls come out this week saying, almost 75% saying that was out of bounds or went too far. And that's been the biggest issue. Even his campaign and his surrogates will say, he got right on that issue by changing the way he talks about it.
I changed the way he talks about it, but he was tweeting about that last Sunday. His staff over the weekend had urged him not to do that, and he kept doing it, but he did change this week. But it was an interesting week. He said this week, if his daughter were sexually harassed, she would get a new job. He said you should pull your money out of the stock market. He said to the Washington Post, if you haven't read this interview, it's almost a week old now, but go back and read this interview with Phil Rucker of the Washington Post. He said if he loses, he thinks he'll form a super PAC to go after his Republican critics. And if you mentioned those polling. If you look at the polling, the problem for Trump is not the horse race numbers. The problem is deep in the polls. Does he have the character? Does he have the temperament? Does he have the judgment? Does he have the experience to be president? So Donald Trump, last night in New Hampshire, perhaps realizing that the Clinton campaign is trying to disqualify him by pushing him across that line, fires back.
Unstable Hillary Clinton, and you saw that. Did you saw that where she basically short-circuited? The people of this country don't want somebody that's going to short-circuit up here, okay? Not as your president. Remember, ISIS is looking, folks. This stuff is so amazing. It amazes me, actually. Honestly, I don't think she's all there.
Now, that's trademark Trump, and it is part of the reason he's the Republican nominee for president. Early on in the campaign, everybody said, you can't talk like that and be a presidential candidate. Well, he's the Republican nominee for president. Up until this past week, he was very competitive in the election, and we'll see if those polls swing back a little bit. But to your point about the economic speech, what the establishment is mad about is that he keeps promising them he's going to be more disciplined, that he's going to run I'm a small government conservative, I'm going to change Washington, I'm going to get you a job, and then get to crooked Hillary. And instead, he keeps doing this. And what happened this week in the establishment is they essentially said, this is our fault. We keep believing he's going to be consistent. We need to stop believing he's going to be consistent.
Look, the short circuit comment, I mean, just coming back to that for a second, that is deliberate. I mean, for all the stuff that Trump sort of, wings, this is something that they feel like, and I was trying to get to the Trump campaign to figure out, look, what's the bigger issue here for why they talk about short circuit and what that means. And they said it shows that Hillary Clinton is robotic and inauthentic, which is interesting because it's in a way the way that Democrats kind of went after Mitt Romney to say that he's, inauthentic. So this inauthentic narrative is something that they're going to try to push. Now, after the week that he had, certainly it was a net negative by a huge stretch for Donald Trump. I mean, it's like we're in the first quarter and he's down by 20 points and maybe, shooting 35% or something from the field. Right? Not very good week for him. This is the one place they're going to try to go back at Hillary Clinton.
But John,